On October 17, 1814, an extraordinary and tragic event unfolded in London's St. Giles Rookery, a densely populated and notoriously impoverished area. The London beer flood, as it would come to be known, saw hundreds of thousands of gallons of beer surge from the streets, wreaking havoc on the neighborhood. While the story might initially sound absurd or even amusing, the reality was far from funny. 8 people lost their lives, and countless others were affected by the destruction. The flood occurred at the Horseshoe Brewery, owned by Moo and Company, and the catastrophe left an indelible mark on London's history. St. Giles Rookery, located in the heart of London, was a crowded and poor neighborhood, infamous for its crime and vice. It was one of the city's most densely populated areas, with narrow streets and dilapidated housing. Life there was challenging, and the conditions were harsh for many of its inhabitants. In the midst of this grim environment stood Moo and Company's Horseshoe Brewery, an establishment that had been producing beer for nearly 2 centuries. Though the brewery had been in existence since at least the 1620s, it had only recently come under the ownership of Moo and Company in 1809. The company wasted no time in expanding its operations. By 1811, production at the Horseshoe Brewery had increased to over 103,000 barrels of beer annually, a significant rise from the roughly 40,000 barrels produced just a few years earlier. The brewery was known for its brown porter ale, a popular beer style made from brown malt and hops. This type of beer required months of aging, usually in enormous vats, to achieve the right flavor. The Horseshoe Brewery had several such vats, some of which were among the largest in the city. One vat in particular, which became the focal point of the disaster, measured an astonishing 70 feet in diameter and was capable of holding the equivalent of 18,000 barrels of ale. The brewing process involved storing large quantities of beer in massive wooden vats, which were reinforced with iron hoops to maintain their structural integrity. These vats were crucial for the aging process, but also posed significant risks due to the immense pressure exerted by the fermenting beer. On October 17, 1814, a brewery storehouse clerk named George Crick noticed a concerning issue with one of the brewery's large porter vats. One of the iron hoops that reinforced the wooden structure had slipped off, compromising the vat's integrity. This particular vat stood 22 feet tall and contained around 3,500 barrels of beer, more than 100,000 gallons. Crick reported the problem to his supervisor, who reassured him that the situation was not unusual. Apparently, iron hoops slipping off the vats happened a few times each year without any significant consequences. Crick was instructed to write a note requesting repairs, but no urgent action was taken. At around 5:30 p.m., just 1 hour after Crick first noticed the slipped hoop, the pressure from the fermenting beer became too great, and the vat exploded with tremendous force. The initial rupture caused a chain reaction, rupturing other nearby vats and casks in the storehouse. The brick wall of the brewery collapsed under the pressure, unleashing a torrent of beer that surged into the streets of St. Giles Rookery. The flood that followed was unlike anything London had ever seen. An estimated 32,000 gallons of beer spilled into the surrounding area, with a wave reported to have reached a height of 15 feet. The sheer volume and force of the beer swept through the narrow streets, inundating basements and lower levels of houses. Many homes were structurally compromised. Some were knocked off their foundations, while others collapsed entirely under the onslaught. Debris from the brewery and damaged buildings cluttered the streets, and the smell of beer soon permeated the air, a smell that lingered for months. The flood's impact was worsened by the fact that London's drainage systems were rudimentary at best. In St. Giles Rookery, an area already prone to flooding and poor sanitation, the beer had nowhere to go. It pooled in low-lying areas, turning cellars and ground floors into hazardous, waist-deep beer ponds. Residents who were at home scrambled to higher ground, climbing onto furniture or fleeing into the upper stories of their houses. For some, there was no escape. Though the idea of a beer flood might initially evoke humor, the reality was a disaster that claimed lives and devastated families. 8 people perished in the flood, either from drowning or being trapped under debris. Among the victims were Eleanor Cooper, a teenage servant working at the Tavistock Arms pub, and Mary Banfield, along with her 4-year-old daughter, Hannah, who were having tea when the beer burst into their home. 5 mourners attending an Irish wake in the cellar of a nearby house also died. Anne Saville, Elizabeth Smith, Mary Mulvey and her son Thomas, and Catherine Butler. The aftermath was somber as community members sifted through the rubble in search of survivors or additional victims. The streets, usually bustling with activity, fell eerily silent as rescuers quieted onlookers to listen for any signs of life. Although rumors later circulated that crowds gathered to drink the free beer, eyewitness accounts suggest that the community focused on rescue efforts rather than revelry. An American who experienced the flood firsthand described being swept off his feet by the torrent and barely escaping with his life. In the days following the disaster, an inquiry was held to determine if anyone was at fault for the catastrophe. Despite the loss of life and extensive property damage, the official verdict was that the flood was an act of God, and the brewery was not held legally responsible. Moe & Company faced significant financial losses, estimated at around £23,000, equivalent to approximately $1.5 million today, due to the ruined beer and damages. However, the company managed to avoid bankruptcy by reclaiming the excise tax already paid on the lost beer, providing a much-needed financial reprieve. While the inquiry did not find Moe & Company at fault, the disaster highlighted the risks associated with using wooden vats for storing beer. The London beer flood led to changes in brewing practices, with wooden vats gradually being phased out in favor of more durable lined concrete vats, which were better able to withstand the pressure of fermenting beer. The London beer flood left a lasting impression on the city, not only because of its immediate consequences, but also due to its absurd and tragic nature. For years after the incident, people would remember the flood with a mix of horror and dark humor. The Morning Post newspaper described the scene as one of the most melancholy accidents we ever remember, likening the devastation to that of a fire or earthquake. The smell of beer reportedly lingered in the area for months, serving as a pungent reminder of the catastrophe. The story of the flood has since been woven into London's folklore, often retold with a blend of incredulity and humor. It became a symbol of even how the most mundane things, in this case a vat of beer, could bring about unexpected disaster. However, the real tragedy lay in the lives lost and the people displaced by the flood. For the families of the victims, it was a sorrowful chapter that went far beyond the novelty of a beer-related disaster. The London beer flood exposed significant shortcomings in the brewing industry's safety practices, particularly regarding the use of wooden vats for large-scale beer storage. These vats, while commonplace, were prone to deterioration and structural failure, especially given the high pressure exerted by fermenting beer. The disaster prompted a re-evaluation of these storage methods, leading to breweries to adopt lined concrete vats that were stronger and less likely to burst. In addition to changes in materials, breweries also became more aware of the need for regular maintenance and inspections of their equipment. The slipshod response to George Crick's report of the faulty hoop was a clear factor in the flood's occurrence. The London beer flood serves as a reminder of the randomness of life and how, in the blink of an eye, ordinary events can turn into extraordinary tragedies. The fact that something as commonplace as beer could become an agent of destruction makes the flood stand out as one of history's most bizarre disasters. It also underscores how industrial processes, while beneficial to society, carry inherent risks that must be managed carefully. If you enjoyed this dive into one of history's strangest and most tragic events, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another fascinating story. Have any thoughts on the London beer flood, or know of another bizarre historical incident you'd like us to cover? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks for watching. Stay curious.